Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another lecture in English 1010A for the summer session. We are in lecture number 10, and I'm doing this as a video for you guys in lieu of my schedule shifting for Monday, August 10th. So this will be a video that will be posted the morning of August 10th for your consumption on that day when we'd normally have our regular online meeting together. A few updates. All of your outlines should be marked and submitted to you. Those should have finally gone through. If you have any questions about those outlines and the marking, you can contact me by email and I can respond to those. You have your first round of essays due on Wednesday of this coming week. So it will be Wednesday the 12th, I believe. So that is a pushback from when they were due last week, so you can submit those as well. If you have questions about your essay, you can let me know. I apologize for this being the format. I just had a few unfortunate issues with my own schedule. Things have been a little bit crazy this semester, and I thank you very much for your patience. But I wanted to release to you guys a lecture about usage and vocabulary to go along with a few vignettes on grammar that will be released a little bit later. I decided I tried to do the grammar lectures or pieces in smaller chunks, and this one will also be a bit shorter than a regular lecture format because it's a video that you can go back and pursue, and we won't have quite the same number of pauses or discussions. But you can look forward to seeing some of the grammar lectures that show up to talk to you a little bit about how to think about more advanced grammar things when it comes to writing your essays. And then today's lecture, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about just general usage and vocabulary, and this will be pertinent for any essay revision that you work on for both the essay that's due on Wednesday and also the larger essay that's due at the end of the course. And so what do we mean when we talk about usage and vocabulary? We mean the kind of words we use when we are introducing material within our arguments, when we are thinking about what words to choose to describe a transition in our sentences, when we are looking to connect causally different arguments together. And so there's many different things that we might be tempted to use because of the colloquial language that we all generate and talk about day to day. And there may also be things you hadn't thought of using because your work in essays has been perhaps not as advanced as it is in this course after you've come through it. So you'll find that our discussion today really is trying to be very practical, and you can come back to these slides, and I'll post this slide. I think probably I'll post it on Wednesday or something when I get back. So you'll have access to all the different discussions that we're going through, and you can just practically sometimes go through these lists and look at your own essay and compare and see what areas or issues you might need to rectify. So again, this is somewhat related to the grammar side of things. We're looking at the mechanics of language production and how when we're writing an essay for English, we can be concise in our writing and we can be very clear. I think vagueness, as we'll discuss in our topic today, comes up a lot in the outlines that you guys have written, and also I suspect in the essays as well. And that's not a problem. Honestly, vagueness in writing is one of the most difficult challenges to overcome because our minds are always thinking about all the different connections that are going on between different material. And we may find that we want to tackle too many things. So the point of today's lecture in part is to give you the exact tools that you need, specific words and phrases that will help you to move away from vagueness in your descriptions and help you have a clear idea of what you want to say. So let us get into it. I apologize for my voice. I'll hopefully drink some tea and it'll be okay. We're going to begin today's discussion with a number of different categories of phrases that we would want to avoid in our writing. And I want to be careful here at the beginning of this section and just suggest this is not true of all kinds of writing or all kinds of speech. When you are speaking with your friends, there is, as we're going to discuss here, a kind of informal language we use, and that's okay. But when we're talking about writing essays for a literary discussion, we want to move away from the kind of language that is, the first case, informal. And the reason for that is informal language will produce in the audience's ear more options that lead away from what you might mean when you give a certain sentence or a phrase. So it's better to be clear, and so we have some options. And what these charts will do is they will help us to see on the left-hand column the kind of phrase that we might be tempted to use in a colloquial or informal setting, an example of where it fits, and then maybe an alternative. And we'll just go through these and talk a little bit about them. So the first one is the phrase a bit. And we use it sometimes when we say things like, the interviews were a bit difficult to schedule. My dog was a bit harsh on the chain, and so it choked its neck. I was a bit tired, so I went to sleep. I think a little bit, but maybe I should think more about that. All of these phrases are using this colloquial term a bit, which is kind of a small amount, is usually what we mean, or a slight amount, and it's a vague term because it offers to the reader options. It could be something we're talking about when we're discussing difficulty. It could be something that is referring to size. It could be something that's referring to a group or collective. So we want to clarify. And an example of how to take the first sentence, the interviews were a bit difficult to schedule, and transform it is with this one. The interviews were difficult, or if you need to give some nuance, the interviews were somewhat difficult to schedule. Another common informal phrase we use is, and this one actually is far more frequent than the phrase a bit, is phrases like a lot of or a couple of. This is vague because in many cases you actually know the exact number of items that you would like to refer to. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's only 2, but you wish to conceal. I'm not saying you personally, but as a writer, we wish to conceal some of that information to make it either seem like there's more out there, or to seem like what we have to say has a larger stake. So we'll say, oh, a lot of people say, or a couple of studies I came across, and maybe you'd only actually studied one thing, but it makes it seem like there's more veracity to the things you're talking about. And the example here is a good one. A lot of studies suggest that women and patriarchy are significant themes in the yellow wallpaper. A lot of studies show that eating or drinking coffee is detrimental to your health. It's not that that's a wrong phrase, but it's just that it doesn't really tell us very much about those studies about coffee. Were all of the studies of the same sort? Were all of the studies dealing with the same material? Were they all relevant to our discussion right now? These are all questions that we have to ask, and it is difficult to be clearer while this phrase, a lot of, remains within your writing. A good example of how to change it or fix it is many or several or a great number of or 8, to give a specific example, studies. And what these are doing is these are shifting the attention away from vagueness to more specificity. Several is a number we know. It's like a hand, 1 or 2. A great number suggests still vagueness, but it's giving you a numerical feature. And then obviously a number itself of the studies is probably preferred. I would ask usually you to rephrase rather than give me even some of these ones, many, several. Better to just tell exactly how many you came across. Another one, America. So a researcher in America. And this is just informal language. We, in writing, want to say the United States or the US or the USA. America is a colloquial phrase we use. Here's another more common one. Isn't or can't, doesn't, would of, or any other contraction that you might use in your writing. These are informal ways we speak to one another, and it comes up a lot in speech rather than actual typed writing. But the general rule of thumb is avoid the informal use of contractions in your writing. Instead, just write it out in full length. The sample isn't, the sample is not. Not, I can't go, but I cannot go. In writing, we want to lengthen this out instead of keeping the contraction. This next one here, kind of and sort of, are words that we have buried very deeply into our psyche in 2020, and similar to the phrase a lot of or a couple of, we say kind of all the time, at least in North American English and maybe in Ontario English. Kind of and sort of are very, very frequent parts of our vocabulary when we're speaking with one another, and they're vague in writing because they don't tell what information you could give to your reader or could look up. They just sort of signal that something may be happening. The findings were kind of significant. You can just say the findings were significant. You could say somewhat, but the better thing to do is just to explain why they are significant rather than have this informal phrase, kind of. Outside of informal phrases, other phrases to avoid are ones that are overly simple or maybe undignified. A word like bad, for example. That was a bad result. Bad is a term that covers a great number of things. It's not a very sophisticated term, meaning that it doesn't identify a specific type of thing. It doesn't tell us, is it morally wrong? Is it poor quality? Instead of that, we might shift to those types. A poor or negative result. So if it's a medical idea and you're thinking about the results at a doctor's office, you want to use terms like negative to indicate, for example, that you specifically failed a test. Maybe they took a blood test to look for some kind of problem and it came back negative. That might be a good thing in your case, but the point is that negative is a more specific term than it came back good or bad. Also, big or humongous is just a little bit unsophisticated as well. A big sample, what does that mean? It could mean a large number. It could be a large sample in general, but it's not totally clear. So use a phrase like a sizable sample, a large sample. They're clearer, less undignified. Sometimes the word get, and along with this the word give, but the get is a very colloquial term for acquiring or receiving. This model gets attention. This story gets attention. Do you get my drift? By this we mean, have you received? Does this receive? So use that word instead. Give, like I just mentioned, this chapter gives an overview. I think I saw a number of you write this in your outlines, in some of the support portions, I believe, of your outlines. You would use this phrase as a kind of auxiliary or helping term, and you ought not to. Instead, you can be more specific and less simple. This chapter provides or offers or presents or describes. And then on you go. Just like bad, also just the term good. So a good example, again, the word good is something we use to talk about morals. So you might be a person who is morally good. but it also may be talking about the quality of something, so it's good condition. That's why we want to help to specify by, is it just useful? Is it prime? Is it most important? Also, the term show gets used just like the word get in ways that do not help to clarify your argument. The below figure shows, or this story shows. But really, shows is a kind of simpler, unsophisticated way to talk about how something is illustrating or demonstrating or arguing, right? I will show in this paper. What you really mean is I will argue in this paper. Vagueness is another big category, and this is probably one of the more important ones for you guys as you think about transitioning your outlines into essays. Vagueness, I have listed on a number of your outlines, can be identified by looking at these kinds of terms here. Stuff. People are concerned about their stuff, and what you mean by stuff usually has something to do with their possessions or their belongings, or personal items rather than public things. And so you can just use those terms to refer exactly to the thing you're talking about. People are concerned about their belongings or their personal effects or their possessions. Just like stuff, thing happens a lot. Excuse me. Thing is used a lot in writing as this general term, but it can mean very many different ideas. The report presents many things. What are those things? If you're telling your audience what a report presents or what the story represents, you could just tell them directly. The story represents patriarchy or the proletariat struggle. The report presents many findings or many details or many recommendations. Those are more specific fields of discourse. A long time or a while. This topic has interested researchers for a long time. Instead, you want to say this topic has interested researchers for more than 30 years or something like that, whatever the term actually is. There's no good that comes in being vague in your arguments, because your reader wants to know what you want to say, and when you use terminology that leads them away from specifics, you just hurt your argument because they don't want to believe you anymore, or they don't think you have something to say. Exaggeration is another phrase that we want to avoid. Phrases like always or never. Researchers, always argue that, or nobody ever says this. In Paul's case, Paul always has flowers around him. These are all exaggerations. Because in the case of Paul's case, even though you could be saying that kind of figuratively, it doesn't help your argument. You might as well tell the audience exactly how many flowers and in what condition and when. Researchers frequently, commonly, or typically argue that. These are ways to modify or modulate a hyperbolic statement. Perfect or best or worst or most or any other superlative. Superlative, of course, is the term we give to adjectives which describe something to the nth degree or the extreme degree. So not good, but best. And if we use our superlatives in literary essays, we will have a tendency to exaggerate our claims. We want to be careful not to do that. So stay away from these kinds of words. The perfect solution to the narrator's problem in the yellow wallpaper was to um, become one with the wallpaper. Was that really the perfect solution? It was maybe a solution. Was it the ideal one? So yeah, you can modify it with things like ideal solution or one of the best solutions to the problem, that kind of thing. Very or extremely or really or to or so or other intensifiers. So an intensifier is not like an adjective, it's more adverbial. But it's doing work of telling the reader to take whatever term it's attached to and extend it or make it stronger in the mind of the reader. So this theory is very important or really important. It's one we see a lot because we use the term really in our everyday life all the time. Instead of that, this theory is just important or crucial or critical or of note. So there's some phrases we use that are a bit too subjective, meaning that you as a author of your literary essay have an opinion and you might use one of these words and it reflects your own opinion, but it's subjective. It's not the experience that everyone would get in the same way from reading or participating in the same kinds of stuff. So something is beautiful or ugly or wonderful, horrible or good or bad. It can be a taste, if you like, or an experience. You know, that tuna sandwich was awful or horrible. Some people like tuna sandwiches, so maybe they would enjoy it. A review of literature yielded many good articles. Well, some people would debate whether the articles were good or whether they were bollocks. A review of the literature yielded many relevant articles, I think is a better way to say that. Words like naturally, the participants naturally wanted to know. Well, whom was it natural for? Is it natural in your mind, in the readers, for their own experience? You can just simply remove it. The participants wanted to know. Another one like naturally is obviously or of course. We say this in colloquial language all the time as well. What we mean by it usually is that we all agree, don't we? And it's a quick way to gather people's opinions on a given topic. But in reality, it just makes for a vague statement because you just include your own subjective perspective in the sentence and you don't need to. The results obviously indicate, and then everyone's like, are they obvious? Why did you have to say that? The results clearly indicate is perhaps better here. Some phrases that we should avoid are ones that are either incorrect or they're unhelpful. He has got or have got. This dissertation has got 4 chapters, and the solution for that is actually to remove the got. This dissertation has 4 chapters. So got is an auxiliary verb. It's a verb that helps to link things together. And often it is used in colloquial language when we're talking with one another. Hey, I've got $10. What you mean is I possess $10, but the slang of it comes out. Just remove the term got. Serves to or helps to. So this chapter serves to explain. And all of that is just kind of unhelpful clutter. You can just say this chapter explains. One of the benefits, I'll just pause here for a second. One of the benefits of taking the time to think about these things is that concision in writing, and by concision I mean cutting away your writing and getting it into a shape that's smaller and smaller, offers you as an author a great deal of wisdom. Because if you are in the habit of using many different phrases which clutter up your work or make it unclear or vague, you will suffer as a writer and a thinker, because this apparatus of all of these other details floating around have to be planted into your essay before you feel comfortable with it. When in reality, you can pare it back until you have just the thing you'd like to say. Okay, other phrases that incorrect. Sometimes we say literally incorrectly. The students were literally dying to participate. Well, that's actually the opposite. They were not literally perishing. They were figuratively. So we've moved from this level of literal description up to this level of figure. They were dying in a figurative sense, meaning not in a literal sense. You can just eliminate the word literally itself to alleviate the pressure here. The students were dying, or they were very eager to participate. Or would have and had of. The study would have considered. It's just a kind of slang that is incorrect. The study would have considered. So the word of is being substituted in for the word have, which is a helping verb. All right, now we have a list of what we might think of as inflated phrases. So these are also phrases to avoid. And here I think is the list of things that you might be able to scroll through at a later time and think about how you're using it incorrectly in your own work. And I'll just go through them fairly quickly so that I don't take up too much of your time. Just comment on it. So a majority of respondents were single parents. And by inflated, we mean we are asking the phrase to take on more work or do more than it really ought to. When instead of a majority of, what we mean is most respondents were single parents. A sufficient amount or a sufficient number of, in the case of this, a sufficient number of cases were selected. What that really means just is enough cases were selected. And we've expanded our word count unnecessarily. As a result of, the interview was canceled as a result of illness. You can just say because of. You could also say due to. The interview was canceled because of an illness or due to illness. At all times, the laptop was kept in a locked office at all times. This is just a colorful way of saying always. At the present time, or at this point in time. Here's the example. The IT sector is expanding at the present time. All we mean by that is now or currently, right? The IT sector is currently expanding. By means of, what we really mean just there is by. Draw attention to, we just mean points to. Due to the fact that, or in light of the fact that, all of that can be compressed into the word because. For the purpose of, we just mean for. For the reason that, again, we just mean because. have a tendency to, as in economists have a tendency to favor policy reforms. It just means we tend to favor policy reforms. Have an impact on, we mean affect. Have the ability to, can. In comparison to, and then we just sometimes use than as a adjective. The results show that the CEOs earn more than CFOs. In light of the fact that, again, another long phrase that really just too complicated. What we mean by that is because. Saad's theory is chosen in light of the fact that it is most relevant. We just mean because it is most relevant. In order to, you can shrink that down to, in spite of the fact that, we mean by that although, in the event that, so in the event that a question was left blank, all we mean by that is if a question was left blank, in the neighborhood of or about. So the factory produces in the neighborhood of $5,000 cars a week. Excuse me, just not $5,000 cars, 5,000 cars a week. What we mean by that really is the factory produces about 5,000 cars a week. Or this one too, in the year 2020, sales peaked in the year 2020 or 2001. Sales peaked in 2001. So that whole phrase, in the year, is kind of irrelevant. Other inflated phrases, is of the opinion, we just mean thinks or believes. Make a calculation of, meaning calculate. Make decisions about, decide on. On 2 occasions, twice. Small in size, again, shorten it to small. The people who are located in, we just mean the people in. The reason why, the word why is redundant. We're about to tell the reader why. So we just say the reason. Here's a good example. The reason why the population decreased is unknown. That's inflated. The reason the population decreased is unknown. Until such time as, that just means until. Whether or not, and again we just mean whether. We don't really need the or not to make sense of that sentence. Okay, so those are some problematic words that we might think about. That include this whole broad topic of phrases we might want to avoid in general. And now I want to talk a little bit about usage, or maybe as a contrast, phrases that we should strive to use when we are writing our essays. If we took all of those phrases that we want to avoid and we just had them in the back of our minds so that we can review something that we have written, you'll be in a good spot. But if you're actually crafting your essay and you're thinking about what kinds of things you'd like to write, this idea of transition words that we're going to discuss now will be pretty useful, I think. So we have the idea of an addition. I think I spoke about this in the basic grammar, just a touch, but we'll elaborate on it here. Here's an example of adding things. We found that the mixture was effective. Moreover, it appeared to have additional effects we had not predicted. So phrases or words like indeed, or furthermore, or moreover, additionally, and also, both x and y, not only x but also y, and besides x in fact. So each of these, like the word furthermore, is helping to add on to your argument. And I think we talked about adding and subtracting as 2 basic categories in grammar. And here's how we're going to start thinking about transitioning now. You also have words that do introductory work. Several researchers have previously explored this topic. For instance, Smith in 2014 examined the effects of blah, 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 blah. Instead of the word for instance, we might have other terms like such as or like, including, as an illustration, for example, for instance, in particular, to illustrate, especially, notably. All of these words help us to do introductory work, moving from one topic to another. Some words help us to transition by referencing other things. The solution showed a high degree of absorption. Considering this result, it is reasonable to conclude that. So a phrase like considering, regarding, in regard to, concerning, the fact that, and on the subject of, all of these kinds of phrases help us to look a sentence back and talk about the results of that sentence. Okay? So the first sentence in this had the solution showed a high degree of absorption. That's a statement being made, and then we're talking about that result in the next sentence. Also, similarities. It was not possible to establish a correlation between these variables. Similarly, the connection between x and y remains unclear. So similarly, in the same way, by the same token, in like manner, equally, or likewise, these are all phrases we might use when we want to talk about things that are similar. Clarification. This is an important one, I think, for a lot of you. We want to make sure that we are taking some time to write sentences that do clarify your ideas. The patient suffered several side effects, namely increased appetite, decreased libido, and disordered sleep. So the namely there helps to connect the first statement in the sentence with the second one, showing us what it was specifically that the patient suffered. We can sometimes use phrases like that is to say, namely, specifically, precisely, or in other words. Some transition words offer us the opportunity to compare. So we want to think about how our examinations of these short stories give us opportunity to do comparative work. That is to build together up into a whole unit your ideas rather than to tear them apart. The novel does deal with the theme of family. However, its central theme is more broadly political. But, however, although equally, by way of contrast, on the other hand, yet, whereas, in contrast, in fact, and conversely. All of these are words that help us to look at these relationships between sentences as being in conflict, comparing them together. Or could we have a concession? So Jones argues that the novel reflects Russian politics of the time. Although this is correct, other aspects of the text must also be considered. So the concession is this term although. He's giving to this study by Jones a sense of validity that it ought not to be challenged on some ground. So we use terms like nonetheless, nevertheless, even though, on the other hand, admittedly, despite this, notwithstanding that, still, although, in spite of, regardless of, these are all phrases that give us a sense of concession. Contrast. So not adding, but removing. So we might dismiss things. It remains unclear which of these hypotheses is correct. In any case, it can be inferred that, sometimes we mean by this like regardless or either way or at any rate or at the same time, the point is this, that your statement is dismissing the previous statement, where it's saying whatever I just wrote is not going to be relevant for what's coming up later. Could have, phrases that allow us to transition with emphasis. Indeed, several studies have supported this hypothesis. Now, the word indeed is a little old-fashioned, so it seems almost arrogant to use it. But I just want to touch on it here that it's a good example of another kind of transition, one that emphasizes something. Above all, indeed, more, and more importantly, those kinds of words. Also, we have replacement. So the character of Godfrey is often viewed as selfish, or at least self-absorbed. This is an important distinction. You are replacing, in the first sentence, the character of Godfrey is the views of him that people have. So most people think he's selfish, or at least self-absorbed. So it replaces the term selfish. Some transition words, we want to talk about the causes of them. Hopefully this isn't too small. But we might have a phrase that is about consequence. Because Hitler failed to respond to the British ultimatum, France and the UK declared war, on Germany. Therefore, because, as a result, for this reason, in view, owing to the fact that, consequently, all these are telling us about a consequence that's happening within the sentence itself. And if we don't do consequence, we might talk about a condition. So we qualified survey responses as positive only if the participant selected agree or strongly agree. Otherwise, results were recorded as negative. So this word otherwise stands in as a condition for this first sentence. We did this only or when, and otherwise is another way to talk about a condition. In the event that, unless, given that, being, in as much as, in that case, in all of the other cases, etc., etc. We also think about purpose. So by that we mean the reason, and we often use the term so that. We used accurate recording equipment so that our results would be as precise as possible. So to, in order to, for the purpose of, in the hopes that, to that end. With this in mind, these are kinds of phrases that help us to indicate purpose when we're transitioning between sentences. Sometimes we have a sequence we'd like to produce. It could be a numbered sequence, like in the first example. So first the conflict, second is this, then third. You just use those phrases first, second, third. Sometimes just initiation. You want to start with to begin with, or in the first place, or initially. First of all, I want to consider marmalade. To begin with, I'd like to talk about how sad everybody is because of COVID-19. Those are the initial phrases to get you started. Or you have a continuation of an argument. Subsequently, previously, eventually, afterwards, after this. You can use this if you want to continue on the same branch of argument without breaking stride. Sometimes you have concluding phrases or transition words like finally, resumption, so ones that go back to another piece. To return to my main argument, it is clear that, so maybe you've had a bit of a digression in your discussion and now you're heading back. Or you might be summing up something. You might be taking a whole bunch of information and you're bringing it down to a sizable piece that people can engage with. In summary, the 4 studies considered here suggest a consensus that the solution is effective. Instead of in summary, you might have, as previously stated, overall, to summarize briefly, given these points of view, these kinds of things all the way. So we're summing it up. And that, guys, marks, I think I had missed I missed a slide there at the end. I apologize for that. But that is the gist of what I wanted to get out to you guys for your Monday class, which, yeah, it's for Monday class, excuse me. And the reason why we're doing it in this format, in part, is so that you have something smaller piece to work with, rather than a really long 3-hour lecture. And because your essays are going to make use of a lot of these pieces of grammatical usage. So if you were finding, practically speaking, that you are having a lot of difficulty working especially on transitions, what words ought I to use if I want to add information or take it away? What phrases should I use if I want to introduce something or if I want to conclude? All of these ideas will help you a great deal. You can come to them and just pluck them out and start your sentence. This will help to give you a bit of a structure for using language as you write your essays. And it'll help you to give a little bit of a checklist. So if you're taking your outline and you are converting it into an essay format, what you want to be doing is starting to write full sentences that expand the support underneath the arguments. And you can do that by attending to a lot of these transition words and usages. Are you making an argument that is going to require a series? It's a little further on, where you're going to enumerate a sequence. Are you initiating a discussion about sequences? Or are you continuing something or going back to another piece? All of these different forms will help you out, and I think it's just a really great reference. So we'll leave this video at this length because I don't want to overwhelm you. I just want to make a few comments. I think overall, as far as the outlines are concerned, the outlines got better as we went from outline 1 to outline 4. I think the marks were actually better overall for people. Some people took a chance, I think, in outline 4, and maybe where they had been getting some 80s, they dropped down to a 70 for that last one. If you are unsure why you received the mark you received, and it's not clear in the notes I gave to you, email me and I'll let you guys know. Okay, I want it to be clear, especially as you think about the final essay. So this essay coming up is important too, but it's really the final one that's worth quite a lot of your mark. So I want you to be clear about your usage of vocabulary before you go into that final one. So you can just think through, like, oh, here are phrases I've been using a lot. Man, I should not do that. It's making my sentences vague, and it's making my argument weak as a result. So you can just scan through this. I think that's all of the announcements I have for you for Monday. There will be more of these, more grammar videos posted, and you should anticipate a Wednesday lecture. I think we also have our Friday lecture coming up as well. So those two are going to be on longer sort of histories of critical discourses. I think we're going to discuss new criticism on the Wednesday, and then a couple of other critical discourses on the Friday for those who would be interested in thinking about English more generally, outside of just writing essays. I hope you guys found this helpful. You can shoot me an email if you have any concerns or questions. I will catch you on Wednesday, the 12th. Have a good day, guys.